Now, a couple of other things in and around politics that I would like to get to here, which is who would end up backing who, should we end up with the hung parliament that most likely is going to be the case after the next federal election. Now, as we know, the Prime Minister thinks that a budget surplus where they have no more money for charities dealing with cost of living, no more help when it comes to cost of living, that somehow that's going to result in them getting a majority government. But as was written today in the Australian newspaper, they think that all of these numbers basically say we're off to a March election. Some people say there's a very small window of something in December, but most likely March would be when we are headed. So we know that minority government is most likely what is going to happen. Why? Because the polls have told us. The Labor Party's primary vote at the last election was 32.5%. News polls say it's at the same mark. However, Resolve says it's way lower than that. Essential says it's way lower than that. Redbridge says, yeah, it's about the same. JWS says about the same. And Morgan, who, by the way, tonight has in two-party preferred, the coalition in front, by the way, 51 to 49, they too show that the Labor Party vote has fallen. But let's focus in on one particular poll. A JWS poll which has turned up in the Financial Review, which, remember, we told you before about how many seats the coalition would win, how many would lose, and there was a chance of this becoming not an each-way elbow, but potentially an each-way Liberal-Labor minority government. Because under their calculations right now, they claim that right now it's 52-48, which means that a Dutton minority government may well be a potential outcome of the next election. Now, I think this is a little too generous, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times before. But let's imagine there was a position where the Liberal Party was mathematically close enough to form government, the Labor Party was mathematically close to form government. Who would they pick? Well, well done to the Financial Review, because they actually picked up the phone and started to ring some of these people and start to put some pressure on them so we would start to know what would happen when the government inevitably goes into minority. They ended up reaching out to 5 members of the current crossbench, that being Rebecca Sharkey, Helen Haines, Allegra Spender, Bob Catter and our mate Di Lee. Rebecca Sharkey's the only one who's given an actual quote, but she says that she believes that her community would expect her to have a conversation with the Liberal Party first. Why? Because, of course, the seat of Mayo is one that has been represented by, among others, Alexander Downer and the Liberal Party for a very long time. So a potential win there for Peter Dutton. Also worth noting out to you that Di Lee, now you would say Di Lee is from a place that used to be hardcore Labor, so presumably she'd be pro-Labor, right? No. Because, according to the AFR today, that while the rest of the country swung towards Labor, Fowler had swung in the opposite direction. She pointed out to the local council results, which also showed that Labor had lost a swath of seats. She says, that to me is an indication that something is happening. So, maybe she could end up backing in a Dutton government. I would think it unlikely, but still potential. So what about Bob Catter? Bob Catter's been through these negotiations plenty of times before. Of course, in 2010, he ended up backing the coalition. But he told the Financial Review that he was very close to Anthony Albanese and there was no guarantee that Dutton would get his support. While he labelled the opposition leader the pick of the bunch on both sides of politics when it comes to leadership, he is, however, critical of the people who are around him. So, again, question mark. But you would presume that whoever's got the best deal for his part of Queensland, which you would have to think potentially could come from Peter Dutton, well, that'd be a good thing. What about the independents, Helen Haines and Allegra Spender? Now, Helen Haines represents a seat that way back when, and I mean way back when, was a Liberal Party seat, however, has been independent, so much so that she was able to replace the previous independent. Allegra Spender, of course, is the Teal, who is representing Wentworth. Haines has said that she would never sign away. Now, listen to this for an absolute non-answer, right? My view, she'd back Labor, but still. Haines, the member for Indi in Victoria, says that she would never sign away her independent vote on bills in a deal, but she was open to negotiations about backing confidence of the House and budget bills. So which one would you pick? Well, of course, she has to sit around and pretend, oh, both sides. She would back Labor. Why? She likes their position when it comes to climate change, and certainly she would be no fan of Peter Dutton. But that's just me going off the entire form of her political career. Meantime, Allegra Spender, who has referred to herself as a small L Liberal and says that she views everything through a business lens, and the assumption is that this being a seat that used to be for the Liberals, that she most likely would end up potentially voting for the Libs. But again, no comment from her. So it's as clear as mud. But let me walk you through the rest of the crossbench as we head towards a minority government. If they were all returned, what would happen? Now, Andrew G is a former Nat. The expectation is that that seat would go back to the Nats, but maybe he ends up being able to out-teel a Teal who has frightened him in the past. Russell Broadbent, who was a person who lost pre-selection, but may well somehow find a way to get back into the parliament. Well, both of those guys, probably for Peter Dutton. Andrew Wilkie, no chance. He backed Gillard, which means, of course, he would back Albo. Monique Ryan, Zoe Daniels, Ali Steggall, Sophie Scomps and Kate Cheney. Well, all of them are in former Liberal Party seats. Now, if they get re-elected, would they all assume that there's been a revolution, there's no support for the Liberal Party anymore? Or if they did end up backing Labor into government, would they end up in the same position as Oakeshott or Windsor? So, the Greens, of course, have 4 MPs and they backed Gillard in 2010. So, back of the envelope here. The Liberal Party's case, in my view, is that the best they could possibly do out of the current crossbench of 18 is to get 9. Okay? That means they would have to get 65 seats at the next federal election. The Labor Party's best case, most likely, is that they would end up with 13 of the 18 seats, meaning they can afford to fall from their current 78 seats in the parliament down to 63. Meaning, if there is a minority government, most likely it would end up being a Labor one, sadly. But apparently all of that may well just not be the case. A majority government may well be coming Labor's way, because apart from the fact that Dutton's unelectable, despite the fact that more people now are disapproving of the Prime Minister, close to 60% of people can't name a single thing the Prime Minister has done to improve their lives, but whatever. Again, Financial Review, sorry for the endless plugs, but they had the good story today, which was an opinion person suggesting that a rate cut will save Albanese, potentially even keeping him in a majority. And the National Australia Bank said today that they do expect a rate cut to happen, not midway through 2025, but potentially early in 2025, maybe as early as February. Michelle Bullock, of course, is the Reserve Bank Governor, and it's important to note that she has said there will be no change this year, and it's most likely to be towards the end of next year. And remember, she's also said if you're suffering under interest rates right now, you should probably sell your house. So I don't think she's planning on saving Albo anytime soon. But that's just some of the maths. And I know you're hardcore politics people, so wanted to peek behind the curtain. And by the way, don't vote for anyone unless they're willing to actually tell you what they would do should they become in a position to choose the government of Australia. If they can't answer the question and they're trying to have sort of, the elbow each way, don't vote for them.